What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about some spoiled, or previewed, I guess, points changes coming from Chapter Approved 2022 that were just posted today, 20th of January 2022, and we get a little bit of a glimpse at what the future of competitive Warhammer 40k might look like with some of these point changes. And to be honest, it's got me pretty excited because unlike previous Munitorum Field Manual changes, where a lot of times they've kind of approached things with a little bit of a deft hand, maybe tried to tone some things down, maybe brought one or two things up, it seems like we're going to be getting kind of a wholesale redux of a lot of different unit profiles and styles of units, and just shaking things up quite a bit, which I think is going to be super interesting as we move into this brand new metagame that's going to be created by the massive number of new codexes coming out. It's going to be sweet. Let's talk about exactly what we have changed here. Now, I have the updated points value that have been previewed by all of these changes that are in the article. We see that Games Workshop is promising points decreases to both the Storm Speeder and Gladiator variants, dropping Storm Speeder Hammer Strikes down to 145, Thunder Strikes down to 150, Hail Strikes down to 125, which is very inexpensive for a super duper fast moving vehicle. I think that's in the realm of takeability just as a utility piece. If you just want something to sit in the back of your deployment zone, it gets to do some work, shooting some heavy stubbers and onslaught Gatling cannons off on people, and especially with the amount of damage reduction around in the metagame right now, having that extra little bit of one damage shooting with a high AP value might be pretty good. And then you can run them off to score secondary objectives, especially with the changes to infantry having a tougher time scoring some secondaries and looking more heavily into scoring those with these vehicles. Seems not too bad for 125 points for a dual heavy stubber, dual onslaught Gatling cannon on that Hail Strike. We also see Immolators and Exorcists both dropping 10. That's going to drop Immolators to 110, Exorcists to 140 or 170 with their upgraded D6 damage rocket pack. That puts Immolators in a pretty good space to be a solid trading unit. We can see them at 110. They'd be 140 with their Melta loadout, putting 4 multi-Melta shots downrange, not to mention their heavy bolter. Seems not too bad. And a good delivery system for those Melta shots, unlike the Retributors that often get picked off immediately if you don't have good protection for them. We see Leman Russ battle tanks down to 130, although it doesn't say in the article whether or not that's going to apply to tank commanders. I imagine that it won't, otherwise they would have said Leman Russ variants or Leman Russ units or something like that. Instead, it just says Leman Russ battle tanks here, so I think that's just going to be the core heavy support unit, which is pretty fair. Tank commanders remain one of the most taken units in Astra Militarum armies. Plague Burst crawlers down 15, that's going to drop them to 150 or 160 with their entropy cannons. This one does boggle the mind a little bit because Death Guard, while they aren't the powerhouse that they were upon the release of their codex, are still a fairly competitive codex, and certainly in a lot of chaos, mixed chaos lists, or even Nurgle lists, or even just any Death Guard list, 3 Plague Burst crawlers is essentially how you built the list to start with. So giving a points decrease to that unit is a little bit disappointing. I would rather have seen some pretty hefty reworks of things like Blight Lord Terminators, maybe some of the units that we don't see quite as much, maybe some Mephitic Blight Haulers, but no, I guess it's Plague Burst crawlers. There's a statement that GW has made at the bottom here. If we give a little preview to scroll down, they've nerfed Hive Guard and Ruckatrek Squig Buggies, which and note that is because of their indirect fire. So it's a little bit weird that they call out indirect fire as being very powerful in the metagame currently, and then also decrease probably the third or fourth most powerful artillery piece in the game. Okay, I mean, it is what it is. We can see they've also dropped Hemlock Wraith Fighters down to 220 from 240. Still a little bit of a silly points value, while they do have the ability to sort of go anywhere they want on the table, and being a psyker on an aircraft is actually pretty sweet. But for 220 points for a unit that shoots 2d3 2 damage shots, no thanks, I think, for the most part. But it is good to see that they are getting a little bit of a swing there. We'll talk about Necrons in a sec because they have an entire spreadsheet for Necrons here, but Orc Battle Wagons also getting dropped, and I think the interesting ones here. That means the standard Battle Wagon before upgrades is going to be 105, but you do have to put guns on that thing, so it's going to end up being a lot more expensive. Bone Breaker down to 160, Gun Wagon down to 150. Importantly, Cannon Wagon down to 155. I think that's a pretty solid profile. Shoots 2d6, 3 damage strength 8 shots, hitting on 4s with that Grot Gunna on its super cannon. I think seems pretty good. Those guys have always been pretty solid, and points drop on them seems sweet. I don't know. That profile's just great. Now we'll move on to talking about Necrons. We do have a little bit of a preview here. Doom Size down 20 points to 180. Night Size down 15 points to 130. Ooh, that makes Night Sights even more exciting than they already have been. We've seen Night Sights being taken a lot more often just as a one-off in order to help deploy those core units using its stratagem where they can place within 3 inches of the Night Scythe. So you can do things like run them up and then drop Scorpek Destroyers or other similar units out of them. Now that a lot of those Destroyer units have gotten that core keyword, which is pretty sweet, and for 130 points, that's almost just an include you might have, again, as a utility unit. You can just go and score engage no fronts, or you can, maybe drop somebody to do an action out of that thing. I don't know. That all seems pretty good. We have a little bit more holistic points changes for the Necrons. We see Doomsday Arc down 10 points to 160. Still a little bit pricey for that guy, but it is nice to see them go down. Scorpex and Ophidians both down 5 points. Actually, all of the Destroyer variants down 5 points. That puts the Scorpex and Ophidians down to 30 points a model. Very reasonable for the stat line that they bring. And Locust Destroyers down to 45 points. 50 points for the Heavy Destroyer once it upgrades its gun. That's great. These are all phenomenal quality of life changes for our Necron friends, and especially since those guys just got the core keyword with that data slate update. That's going to make these units that already have been greatly increased in viability by that core keyword addition even more lucrative. So I think these are going to be great changes for the Necron faction. Whether or not it catapults them into success, I don't know, but it simply, for the most part, I think makes the already relatively competitive list that Necrons were playing with slightly more efficient. So they're probably still ruling the roost around the mid-tables, but I think this is definitely going to push them up, especially if you're taking something like a full unit of Locust Destroyers. All of them dropping 5 points means that, a lot of times you're grabbing at least 30 or 40 points back to your list, which can be another utility unit. If you're running multiple Locust Destroyers, that starts adding up quite a bit, and I think a couple versions of Necrons have potentially dropped over 100 points with these changes, which is pretty significant. We also see a lot of the Super Heavies and Lords of War change. The Silent King is my favorite, dropping from 450, minus 30 points, to 420. Heyo! Blaze it, Silent King. We also have the Monolith dropping to 330 alongside the Obelisk. The Obelisk, while it's not quite as laughably the worst model in the game as much as it was in the 8th edition variety of the Codex, it is still probably not very good. The Monolith has some interesting utility pieces, but again, at 330 points apiece for these big units, I'm not sure that they're still going to see play. Certainly makes them look a little bit better. Tesseract Vault down to 450. The Tesseract Vault actually is one of the better super heavies in the Necron Codex, and alongside the other ones going down, trying to squeeze that guy into a super heavy auxiliary actually feels a little bit more exciting. I am worried about these super heavies and anything above 18 wounds with the release of these big railgun weapons out of the Tau Codex, so I'm not sure that that's really a build that we want to be hanging our hats on, but a Tesseract Vault, if you ever have the chance to put one on the table, it's not too bad. Moving on to Space Marines. We got a lot of changes to Space Marines, especially the unique sub-factions in Space Marines, which I think is a really good way to approach things, because we have been seeing a lot of discrepancy between the different chapters, and especially the supplement-style chapters. We see a couple changes to Blood Angels, who are really in need of it. I do think the issues with Blood Angels are a little bit more mechanical than they are just from an efficiency standpoint, and I would love to see a preview here for, maybe a discount to Sanguinary Guard or some of the units that would really rocket Blood Angels up into a competitive placement. But we do see a change to Death Company down to 20 points per model, Intercessors down to 22, Death Company Intercessors, that is. And that is extrapolated because they do note that all Death Company squads are down 2 points. They show an Intercessor, and the units are Death Company Marines and Death Company Intercessors, which I imagine those fall under the umbrella of those Death Company squads. So that would make sense that they're both 2 points less. Death Company are kind of, I think, on the fringe of playability, so getting that 2 points per model discount may put them into a position where they're going to be pretty good. Getting that pregame move and being able to alpha strike really hard with those guys is pretty solid, so hopefully that will that it helps them a little bit out. Mephiston also down 15 points, down to 140. Sure, okay. We see some changes to Dark Angels, who, again, while they are still a boogeyman of the meta somehow, have been kind of falling by the wayside recently, just been destroyed by maybe the more efficient factions, and especially the new codexes that have come out since the release of their supplement. We see Nephilim Jet Fighters down 15 points to 175, Dark Talons down to 195. Not sure that you're gonna, really focus on these units, but definitely makes you feel a little bit better for taking them. The big one here, Black Knights down from 40 to 35 points. That is a huge decrease for a unit that I do think can potentially see some play in these Raven Wing lists that Dark Angels have been focusing on very heavily more recently, and I think that is gonna be pretty gross. We also see a change to Wolfen, going down 2 points a model from a base 22 down to 20. That definitely helps their game plan a little bit as a piece trading unit, one that you just want to be able to throw away into an enemy melee unit and be assured that even through an interrupt or a charge, they're going to be able to fight on death and at least trade 1-for-1 with that unit. They were a little bit pricey for that in the past, especially since they, only with a 4+ save, oftentimes were just lit up on the way in. Being a little bit cheaper certainly is going to help out that game plan quite a bit more. So I do appreciate the lower points cost in Wolfen. I do also appreciate that Games Workshop has come to my point of view that Thunderwolf Cavalry really needs some love, dropping them 5 points a model from 45 down to 40 before you buy any upgrades for them. Really lacking the infantry keyword super duper hurts these guys. The cavalry keyword has basically no support in 40k, and that means that they often get stuck behind terrain. They're significantly less maneuverable than similar options like Wolfguard or Skyclaws at delivering those big heavy melee weapons to your opponent. And while they're a little bit more resilient and they have a little bit more of a volume of attacks with those Thunderwolf attacks, they just never really came out ahead on an efficiency standpoint. And at 40 points a model, I think we're getting closer there. Now they compare much more favorably to a pair of Wolfguard than they did in the past. We also see the Corvus Blackstar for Deathwatch getting a little bit of a points decrease down to 165 points from 180. A unit that we may see a little bit more in the Army of Renown that's getting some play, using those Kill Team Extremist stratagems to get a bunch of auto-hitting wounds off with close-range weapons, and using the Corvus Blackstars to deliver those models certainly helps. All interesting stuff. Now, we do see a couple points increases as well, and we can go ahead and jump right into the Space Marine points increases. We see the Primaris Chaplain up 10 points from 115 to 125. I think very appropriate because that profile is very silly. There's almost no reason to take a Primaris Bike Chaplain if you have the option, because he's very good, and at 125 points, I still think you probably will still take that guy, especially given all of the synergies in Black Templars that you can bring with Chaplain units, and especially this dude. Throw Tannhauser's Bones on that guy, and he becomes this unkillable machine. And it's all pretty strong stuff. It is a little interesting that it took Games Workshop this long to realize that turns out when you take a chaplain body who's already a character that a lot of armies want to have, a lot of Space Marine builds want to be taking anyway, and you just give him a bunch of extra wounds and a bunch of extra melee profile and a ridiculous speed, and you don't really change his points cost that much. He's only a couple points over the core cost of a Primaris Chaplain. That guy's going to get taken a lot. So now he's appreciably more expensive, and I think that comparison looks a little bit better. We also see Volkite Contemptors going up 10 points. How this is implemented, though, is it's a little bit up in the air. Right now, according to the article, a Volkite Contemptor, or a Contemptor Dreadnought, any Contemptor Dreadnought with a Volkite Culverin will be up 10 points. Now, whether that means that the classic Volkite Contemptor build with double Culverins is going to be up 10 points, or whether a single Culverin build is up 10 points. Ergo, a double Culverin build would be up 20. I'm inclined to believe the latter, so a double Culverin is going to be up 20 points. That will apparently hit every single Contemptor as well, so Chaos Contemptors are not going to be immune to this. We'll see all of those builds popping up a couple points, which I think is very appropriate. They are wildly undercosted and very effective. Although, to be fair, the metagame, the defensive metagame, is kind of outpacing them a little bit, especially with the amount of damage reduction that exists right now, with things like Crusher the Stampede and Drukhari Thick City using Artists of the Flesh to get damage reduction on their whole army. Those Volkite Contemptors haven't really been pulling their weight, although they are able to spit out a bunch of raw saves and mortal wounds, which certainly helps, and they still definitely deal damage over the course of the game, and are a good platform for Cyclone missile launchers. Hopefully this change will be that these Relic Contemptor players will have to look elsewhere for their anti-tank. Whether it's a different Contemptor build, I'm sure that, being an efficient platform with the core keyword, there's going to be a different Contemptor build that'll be good, but who knows? Anyway, let's talk about some other factions. Grey Knights up 10 points with Nemesis Dread Knights. Now, importantly, it doesn't look like Nemesis Grand Masters will be increasing, so this is just the standard Nemesis Dread Knight, which is going to tax a Grey Knight army 30-ish points if they're taking 3 of them. I think very appropriate. That's going to put them up to 130, 170 points once they're outfitted with all of their guns. Volkite Volgliers and Lightning Locks up 5 points apiece on Moiraxes. Not sure that it makes a huge difference, but there it is. I'm not actually convinced that the Armiger spam lists are particularly powerful. They tend to be kind of skewy, and I think any heavy anti-tank is going to tear through them very quickly. So I don't know how much I like to see War Dogs be increased in points, War Dogs and or Armigers. But, there it is. They've elected to do it. Foul Blightspawn up 15. So we're already eating into some of those points that we just unlocked in those Death Guard lists from the Plagueverse Crawlers going down, although overall still a net gain for Death Guard players. Hive Guard up 5, back to 50, which is where they were at the start of the year. They had dropped from 50 down to 45 and then got a bunch of buffs in the High Fleet Leviathan supplement that made them significantly better, so back up to 50 makes a ton of sense to me. Now, another hit to Orcs here. Rekka-Trek Squig Buggies up 20 points to 110. You have to remember as well that they are also subject to that rule of 1 that was imposed on all of the buggy units in the last datasheet update, which means that you're going to be still capped at 3 Rekka-Trucks, and they're going to be more expensive, which is pretty brutal. Last and maybe least, I don't know, Beast Boss on Squigosaur increased by 30 points up to 175. Feels like kind of an overreaction. I don't know. I wasn't sure that Beast Bosses on Squigosaurs was necessarily the most powerful thing in the Orc Codex. I think there were a lot of other units I would have maybe increased in points cost before them. Certainly they are a very powerful unit and an excellent smash or tanky character, and one that is probably worth more than their points value, but 175, not 100% sure. Now, obviously, these are just a couple of the changes that have been previewed. I'm sure we'll see a lot more changes over the breadth of the game. If your faction didn't get touched, or some stuff you're really worried about are going to be, haven't been hit in these preview changes, I imagine that we will see some changes to them when that book actually releases. Like I said, we are going to be in a very changing metagame with all the missions changing and with, production delays, as is always the case. Delaying a couple codexes, Genestealer Cult and Adeptus Custodes have just been released and still have to make their impact on the meta. But also, we're right around the corner of a new Craft Worlds Codex and a new Tau Codex, both of which look to be transformative to the metagame. So this is really going to be the Wild West for 40k over the next, probably 1 to 2 months or so, as all of these changes release and shake things up, and we'll give it a little while for things to settle down. So it's going to be an interesting time over the next couple weeks. I'm super excited for it. But if you want to give the GT 2021 meta a last hurrah, I'm going to be streaming the T5S2 Invitational, which is using the current rules, the non-updated chapter-approved rules, at least for the group stage, which is going to be happening over the next couple of weeks until February 6th. That's going to be streamed not only over on my Twitch channel, but also on the YouTube channel. So if you just go check that out, you'll be able to see VODs of that or the live videos when they go live. And we do some live commentary on those. Those are the 16 best players in online 40k fighting it out in order to be crowned the #1. And it's going to generate some good games of Warhammer 40k. So if you want to go check that out and watch the pre-change points values in action before this book goes live, check that out. And remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.